Every one of us has heard the call. Brothers of true metal, proud and standing tall.
Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. We go back to 1992. Our second Manowar episode, and it's been quite a while since the first one. I think that was one of the first 5 or 6 episodes that we did, so looking forward to that. But before we get to some Manowar, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. When the metal exchange is in town, speakers explode. So.
That they do. We are recording this one a little bit early as we are going to see Powerwolf tomorrow night. But before we talk about all things Manowar and Powerwolf and all that jazz, anything new this week that kind of caught your ear?
Yeah, I think the first thing I definitely want to mention is the something I posted in our Facebook group that Voyager has a new single that they submitted to Eurovision, and they got chosen as Australia's choice. This is this the second year in a row that they have been chosen? I think they were chosen last year as well, or the year before that.
Something like that. I think that's right. Yeah.
So it's a new track called Promise. It's just that synthy kind of I guess just to coin a phrase off their shirt, epic electro progressive pop power metal that we've come to love and enjoy. But this is a really good tune as per usual. So give it a listen if you haven't. It kind of made me look at my collection of Voyager songs, and it made me realize that they have not come out with a full-length album in a while. A handful of singles the last few years, but they're definitely due for a full-length album. And another thing that impresses me about that band is how they've stuck together since Ash joined the band as their drummer, literally like right before they came to the U.S. for the first time. They've had the same lineup of guys and gal, and they really just seem like a real tight-knit group, and couldn't be nicer people. I've had the pleasure of meeting all of them, and I am psyched for all the success for them because they truly deserve it, and this single is really, really good. So
yeah, I'm hoping that this kind of could be the lead single for a new album or something like that, and that it kind of catapults them into the next stratosphere. I sometimes feel that it's harder with Australian bands just because they're so far away from Europe and obviously North America that like doing tours is a real major production. And for whatever reason, like, you know, they're not invited to the festivals like Wacken or I don't think anybody from Australia has played 70,000 Tons. I know there's a lot of people that have been clamoring for Be'lakor and other bands as well, but for whatever reason, it just never seems to materialize.
I'm all for, once Voyager blows up, headline tour in the U.S. with Vanishing Point, Lord, and Black Majesty. So
sign me up. I'll get multiple shows. I'll get multiple shows on that tour.
Aussie Mania running wild.
I like it. I have to be honest. The only album that I really thought this week that came out that really kind of was interesting was the All My Shadows album. And I think the reason for it is because I still don't understand why this album came out under this moniker and not under the Vandenplas like banner, because I don't really hear that much of a difference between the last few Vandenplas albums and this album.
Is it on a different label? Is that why?
I think it's on Frontiers, but my understanding, if memory serves, was that the last Vandenplas album was actually on Frontiers, which is a bit of a departure for the label, but you know, like I said, under the same umbrella, so they've been with them for a little while. What were your thoughts on this album? Did you have a chance to listen to it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot, but I if you had just labeled it Vandenplas, I don't think I would have questioned it at all. Like I don't think I would have even noticed. It's just Andy Kuntz's vocals are, pretty unique. So you hear that and you think of Vandenplas immediately, but the music itself is very kind of in that vein. I'd say it's a little bit more melodic metal than prog metal. But I mean, I think you said it, that like that's kind of the direction that Vandenplas had been going in anyway. So it's interesting. I just wonder if maybe there's a few members that are not that there's in the band that are not from Vanden Plas. So maybe that's why. But it is very Vanden Plas-esque, as one might say. But speaking of Frontiers, I grabbed that album from the band Cray or Craya. I'm going to call it Craya. And speaking of just like good old fashioned melodic rock, melodic metal, they have a new album called Weightless, and it's really good. I liked it a lot. I had only heard like one song from this band previously, and I think it was through you. I don't know if they were on one of your lists, not last year, but maybe the year before, or the year before that. But that's kind of why they were on my radar. And after Crown had such a really great album this year, like I feel like this is right in that kind of in that same vein. But also, I don't know if it's quite as good as the Crown album, but it's still quite an enjoyable listen. Just super catchy, hooks galore. I like this one a lot. How about you? Did you get a chance to listen to this?
Yeah, it was good. I don't. My biggest issue is that I think Frontiers sometimes puts out so many albums with a similar sound that for something to really resonate above the rest of the good stuff, it has to be truly one of a kind or something different about it. And I didn't find this one to be remarkable. It was an enjoyable listen. I liked it. I will listen to it again for sure. But I don't know that it's going to wind up on any year-end list or anything like that. Although I must say the vocalist is fantastic. I thought he was a really good singer over good, if not great music.
Yeah, good. I'll continue to listen to it, and we'll see if it makes the list. And the other thing, this album just came out today, and I've already listened to it. The Japan's all-female band Love Bites released their new album Judgment Day. Boy, this one was an earworm. I listened to it once and loved it immediately. Like it's already on my best of list.
Wow, that didn't take long.
Yeah, just one listen's all it takes. I'm sure it will remain there. I think they've gotten better and better with each release, and this one is no exception. And they have their Japanese contemporaries Galnerius following up, I believe, next week or next month, or next week is next month, so either or. But they have an album coming out soon too, so we'll see which of the Japanese power metal bands ranks higher come the end of this year. But this was really good. I enjoy it. It's I think I describe it to you as frenetic. It's got a very frenetic. It has kind of that old school, like Keeper era Halloween kind of vibe to it, but with totally different vocal style. It's just really fun. Just really fun music. So
I will make
it's a band I'd love to see live one of these days.
I will make a point to check it out. I know that you were looking forward to it, but I know that by the same token, it kind of just dropped on our laps today. So I'll definitely give this a listen, and I'll report back.
I literally pre-ordered it yesterday, and then I woke up this morning and I had an email. It's from iTunes. I was like, "Your album is now released." I was like, "Oh, well, that was quick." So I popped it on, and it was very enjoyable.
Nice.
So yeah, we've both talked about it privately, but this year is off to a really great start compared to where we were at this time last year. Almost 2 months in, and there's a lot of really strong albums that have already been dropped. So
yeah, for my money, much better start than last year. I don't know that. I don't know. I'll say it this way: I don't know that anything that came out in the first 2 months is a lock for my album of the year or anything like that. I mean, there's a long way to go, but just the consistency of the releases, I thought, was a little bit higher quality overall than that of last year.
Hey, to be fair, your album of the year was on at the top of your list from the previous year. So.
Right. Oh, I know, but I don't expect that to happen this time. I think that something will come along that will grab me, and quite frankly, it may be Sleep Token. My album of the year may be your disappointment of the year, but we'll get there, and we'll get there.
It's going to be like Evergrey. If it makes my list at all, we'll call it a win.
Nice. Until I force us to cover it in a few months, but we'll get there. Let's talk Manowar. Let's talk the Triumph of Steel. September 29th, 1992. So we were 10 when this came out. Just a little peek behind the curtain there. A different lineup than their previous releases. Eric Adams, not the mayor of New York City, but the vocalist for Manowar on this one.
He's the mayor of New York City in our hearts.
That's right. The mayor of Auburn, New York. And then also Joey DeMaio, of course, on bass. But unlike prior albums, David Shankle on guitars for his one and only Manowar album appearance, and Kenny Edwards, the Rhino, on drums. If I would have told you that this was a different lineup, would you have known it?
I think I would have guessed. I feel like the change from Kings of Metal, I don't know if change is the right word, but just the evolution from Kings of Metal to Triumph of Steel, like, it's definitely a different vibe. But then again, like, the album that we covered in the infancy of the podcast was Fighting the World, which came out prior to the year before Kings of Metal. And that album was a little bit different too. I think they were kind of going for a little bit more radio friendly, MTV friendly kind of sound with blow your speakers and what have you. Kings of Metal, I would argue, was their finest album, their best start to finish. Had some of the greatest songs. It was just vintage Manowar. And then this one, Triumph of Steel, almost feels a little bit experimental, especially with this, 20 plus or 28 plus minute epic to kick things off. And then just some songs that just, the rest of the album just has no flow. It's a very strange selection of songs, some of which are really, really good, and some of which just aren't. But yeah, I think I would have guessed that there may have been some sort of personnel change. I mean, Joey DeMaio has always been kind of the ringleader of this circus. But it even appears that David Shankle has songwriting credits on half the songs on this album. So I mean, I would imagine that he has some influence on this album, and then, like you said, this is the only one he appears on. So, what about you? Did you get like that kind of vibe that they were going in a different direction?
I did. I don't know that I would have guessed that the musicians were half different, but I definitely can hear the evolution of the band, because it had been a few years, obviously, since Kings of Metal had come out. I agree with you. That is my favorite Manowar album. There are a ton of classics. And when I think Manowar, I really do think of that album as kind of the quintessential Manowar sound, if you will. This one is such an interesting ride, no pun intended, just because, like, number one, there's a nostalgia factor, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second, but also I feel like they were definitely experimenting here, because this is so different than the prior album. Much better production. But just the what they tried to do with a lot of these tracks, I felt was completely different than stuff that they had done in the past. Now, don't get me wrong. It's Manowar. The second the band kicks in and Eric Adams is singing, this is Manowar. But it's just a different presentation than any of the albums that came before it, and dare I say, any of the albums that would follow it.
I could not agree more. It also kind of, I think, marks the beginning of the what I call the part-time Manowar era, because from 1982 to 1988, the band released, I want to say, 6 or 7 albums. I mean, they were just machines churning out. And then after Kings of Metal, which came out in 88, it would be 4 years until this album, Triumph of Steel, will be released. It'd be another 4 after that, before we would see Louder Than Hell. And then the albums would get further and further apart as they went forward. I believe there's only 2 or 3 full-length albums that were released after Louder Than Hell. So I don't know if there's any connection there, but I think I had mentioned to you offline that this to me was kind of like it marked the transition period for Manowar into kind of a more part-time, maybe not so much as a touring band, but just as far as making studio music. Like, if you compare the first 6 years to the last, I don't know, like everything pretty much from Kings of Metal to now, they might have made more songs in those first 6 years than they did in the entire period of time.
Oh, the
that
30
followed
years
it.
or 34 years after it. There's no
Right.
question. It's interesting. And I'll say this. First of all, you're right. I think that this is when the band really did kind of transition into more of a, I don't want to say like a side project, but like it was not the full-time thing that they were doing before that. But you have to remember, 1992, I mean, this was after the grunge wave had come through, and like just a lot had changed. Yeah, I mean, it was the battle. It was the battle of Hector and Hector Falls. But like, it's just things were so different by 1992. So maybe that's part of it. The one thing I've noticed before we even talk about the album or the nostalgia, I think this is an album that the band consciously or subconsciously tries to forget. Not because they don't love the songs, but like they never touch this stuff live, really. Like they're doing a tour now. I was looking at set lists earlier today. They are basically touching all of the old albums, but they don't go anywhere near this one. And I found that to be kind of interesting because maybe it was the fact that Schenkel was a one and done. Maybe it's the fact that Joey DeMaio didn't write the entire album by himself. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, they don't really play any of this stuff live, and I'm kind of curious as to why. I don't really know if there's a story behind it. If there's a Manowar fan out there that wants to tell us, I'd love to hear it, because this is, in many ways, a forgotten classic, and in other ways, I can understand why they don't go near it.
Yeah, I mean, now that I'm kind of taking a look also at the set list, and I mean, there's just a lot of stuff from that early era that just doesn't get played. But I mean, the fact that they didn't play anything from this album might say something, because they do play at least a song from Louder Than Hell and 2 songs from Kings of Metal and 3 songs from Fighting the World. And there's like I feel like there's like the whole early years of Manowar kind of get skipped over. They played 2 songs from Battle Hymns and 1 from Into Glory Ride, and that's it from the Fighting the World era, which I think they released at least four albums prior to that. It's interesting. Like I think they've just been around for so long that it's going to get to the point where, there's going to be stuff missing. And like, it kind of reminds me of how the band always just, doing whatever they please, despite it not being, what conventional wisdom might suggest. Released 2 double live albums a year apart in 97 and 98.
2 totally different set lists.
Yeah, 2, and no, I don't think there are any repeat songs, which I think if you were to buy those 2 sets, it should pretty much cover just about every Manowar song up until that point, from like up to Louder Than Hell, that you would want to hear. I remember buying both of those. I don't think I've listened to them since high school, in all honesty, but it's interesting. I feel like they've definitely just that band, the kind of band that's been around for so long that you're gonna nitpick the set list, because there's just so many great songs that they're bound to skip a bunch that you would consider your favorites.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this was one of, if not the first, like real metal band that you got into.
Yeah, this was the second metal album I ever bought. A Handful of Rain was the first, and man, I actually do remember going to the Tower Records on Old Country Road, and my dad bought me this CD, and I remember when I bought Handful of Rain, I was basically at Handful of Rain and Gutter Ballet in my 2 hands, and was like basically deciding, do I want the album with Chance on it, or do I want the album with Gutter Ballet on it? And I went with, it was basically a coin flip. I went with A Handful of Rain. I guess when I went to pick out another album, I wanted another band, and being that, there's only so many metal bands in 1997 that you're going to find at Tower Records, I saw this album sitting there, and I knew Metal Warriors from the mixtape that Ralph had made me, and as a matter of fact, was the very first song on the tape, which was like a pretty amazing intro to my metal fandom, and I'll talk more about that when we speak of the song proper, but for whatever reason, this was just the album that I chose, and so I had basically been listening to just Handful of Rain and the mixtape Ralph made me, like, just repeatedly. I listened to Handful of Rain so many times I didn't listen to it for years because I was just so sick of it, and now I can finally go back and listen to it again. I don't think I killed this album nearly as badly, but I did play it a lot, to the point where, like, I went back and all 28 minutes of Achilles, Agony, and Ecstasy were very, very familiar and very, very much burned into my head.
All right, but I want to ask this question. You go to Tower Records with your dad, you pick out this album, and he's now, I'm assuming, paying for it because you're 15 years old. You probably weren't working. Let me ask you this.
No, I didn't have any disposable income until I was 22, so...
Some would argue you don't have any at 42, but that's not the point. But my question is, when he's paying for this and he's looking at the album cover, what the fuck is your dad thinking? Because
I'm just glad that he didn't take it out of the liner notes and pull out the full length poster with the naked ladies writhing around. That thankfully he just only saw the 1/6 of the artistic masterpiece that was this cover. I mean, I don't know. He might have questioned my sexuality from the cover of this album.
I mean, you have this like massive man on the front, and normally we don't even talk about cover art, but I feel like this one deserves a little bit of a something. You got this jacked up Ultimate Warrior looking guy on the front with the tassels on the arms and everything, right? With a gigantic hammer, although he's not Thor, and a sword in the other hand, and you
with
have
a claw, a sword with a claw on the bottom.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Or a talon? Is it more of a talon than a claw? Now think about the cover of Handful of Rain, and there might be reason to question: does he like girls? Like, based on these two albums.
Well, if you would have shown your dad the rest of Triumph of Steel, I think that he would have made a lot more sense at that
Maybe
point.
He would have been a Manowar fan.
Very well, might have been. So this thing comes home. I remember getting it in and around the same time. If it wasn't the end of '97, it was not long into 1998 where I had this thing. And it was my first Manowar album. And ironically, like, for a testosterone-filled 15 or 16-year-old, this was like, this hit all the marks. Although I go back and I listen to it, and my God, it was a different experience this week. I think I mentioned it. I think I mentioned this to you when you picked it. I don't think I've heard this album in 20 years. It's just one of those albums that I did play to death, and then I'm like, if I want my Manowar fix, I go back to Kings of Metal once in a while. But I can't say that I played this in literally 20 years.
That's kind of it makes me happy that I picked it then, because it's more fun to kind of just like retread something you haven't heard in a while. I mean, the one thing this album has on Kings of Metal is that it doesn't have Pleasure Slave on it. So
it doesn't. But I'll say this: we talk about meaty albums. This thing clocks in at almost 70 minutes, and let's just get into it. The album kicks off, and you alluded to this earlier, with an 8-part epic called Achilles, Agony, and Ecstasy in 8 parts. It's over 28 and a half minutes long. I have some thoughts I want to share, but before I do, I want you to take the lead on this one. Talk to me about Achilles, Agony, and Ecstasy, and tell me your thoughts in terms of, is it as good as you remember? Is it not as good as you remember? Is it better? Is it one of those things that, like, I don't know. Talk to me about this song, and then I'll kind of get into my thoughts.
Sure. To me, this could have been incredibly self-indulgent and obnoxious and masturbatory and all the words we use to typically describe Yngwie. And it's actually like incredibly deep, really well done. Each part has a very unique and a sound that stands out from the other parts. There's parts of both drum solos and bass solos that can actually, you can envision it being some sort of battle. This is really, really just, I thought this was so cool, and this was beyond, at the time I first heard it, this was beyond anything I had ever heard, because it wasn't like I was growing up listening to 2112 or anything that was this deep and just had this much depth in one song. And I thought it was really interesting. This quote, I have to read this quote because to me, it's really cool. So this was from a professor in classics from Bologna University in Italy. And her name is Eleonora Cavallini. And she actually wrote about this song, and said, Joey DeMaio's lyrics imply a careful and scrupulous reading of the Iliad. The songwriter has focused his attention essentially on the crucial fight between Hector and Achilles, has paraphrased some passages of the poem, adapting them to the melodic structure with a certain fluency and partly reinterpreting them, but never altering or upsetting Homer's storyline. This is clearly spoken by somebody else, not me. The purpose of the lyrics and of the music as well is to evoke some characteristic Homeric sceneries, the raging storm of the battle, the barbaric ferocious exultance of the winner, the grief and anguish of the warrior who feels death impending over him. The whole action hinges upon Hector and Achilles, who are represented as spectacular characters divided by irreducible hatred and yet destined to share a similar destiny. Both are caught in the moment of the greatest exaltation as they savagely rejoice for the blood of their killed enemies, but also in the one of the extreme pain when the demon or daemon of war finally pounces on them. Furthermore, differently than in the irreverent and iconoclastic movie Troy, in Achilles' agony and ecstasy in 8 parts, the divine is a constant and ineluctable presence, determining human destinies with inscrutable and steely will, and despite the generic reference to the gods, the real master of human lives is Zeus, the only god to whom both Hector and Achilles address their prayers. So, you mentioning that the guy on the cover looks like the Ultimate Warrior, that quote goes right out of an Ultimate Warrior interview. But
but the command of English language is both better than me and Jim Halpert.
I know. So. I was really impressed that scholars at a university would study this song because it was so deeply rooted in this whole Iliad book or whatever. I think it's just a really impressive piece of music. And I had read somewhere else that there was I guess that somebody had mused that Manowar maybe were going to do like a concept album, and it just didn't pan out, and they just kind of kept this and then just wrote a bunch of other songs instead. So I'm not sure if any of that is true, but even so, like I just feel like this is just a really, really cool piece, and unlike anything we've ever really talked about on this podcast.
You used a series of adjectives. I will paraphrase and name some of them because I don't know
that
I shockingly not one of them. You said, I think, over the top, self-indulgent, masturbatory, long. I mean, all of these things. And then I think you pivoted and said, but it's not any of those things. And I completely and wholeheartedly disagree. This is all of those things and more, but it's still awesome. This is over the top. It's self-indulgent, but not to the point where it actually disrupts from the song. In other words, it is. I'll just give you a little flavor on this. The drum solo is, I think, 5.5 minutes long. Literally 5.5 minutes of drum solo. And I could be wrong about that, but it is very, very long. And then we have a bass solo later on, which is like a 3 or 4 minute bass solo. And I'm sorry, a 4.5 minute drum solo. But still, like, my point is long solos. But what this song does is it meticulously lays out the battle or the emotion that they're trying to evoke from each one of these separate sections. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It's a very long song. If you've never heard it, do yourself a favor. But the way the whole thing starts off with this like anthemic epic sounding march into battle, and the way it ends just frenetic and fast, and the way that the solos are kind of interspersed in the middle. There is a quiet genius to this. And when you think back that the last album they had done was Kings of Metal, which is a bunch of 4 and 5 minute songs for the most part, this is nothing like that. But I would say one thing. It doesn't fit at all with the rest of the album. And I often wonder, should this have been like a standalone EP, like there, A Change of Seasons?
Yeah, it could have been. But
Because
to be fair, like,
it's still been 40 minutes.
To be fair, none of the songs on this album fit with the rest of the songs on the album.
That's
like,
true.
they all are like totally different types of songs. I mean, it's really interesting. I'm just, the more and more we talk about it, the more I'm glad we kind of went with this, because I feel like there's more meat on the bone conversation wise than any other Manowar album that I can think of.
Well, I'll say
go ahead.
this. When I was younger, I definitely did not appreciate this song, and I can't tell you how many times I would put the album on and start with Metal Warriors and then play the rest of the album. So I was very familiar with tracks 2 through 8, but I was not as familiar with the opener because, I don't know, 16, 17-year-old me couldn't sit there for 30 minutes and listen to it. So
I have a distinct memory of being in the car and my parents, probably my dad, driving to somewhere to look at a college. Might have been Boston, or I'd have my Discman and whatever number of discs I had at the time, probably, I don't know, 15 or 16, maybe 20 discs at the time, not that many in retrospect. But and I remember listening to this song and just being like, well, I got plenty of time to kill. What better song to listen to than the almost 30-minute, I never would skip this song. I always thought it was such an integral part of the album, and I think it's probably the most memorable.
Oh, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have skipped it. I'm curious to see if you left Long Island and you hit play. Did you make it to Boston before the song ended, or were you just outside of Providence? But nonetheless, very, very interesting. I'm glad that I got to go back and listen to it a bunch of times this week, and definitely different from anything they would do going forward. And then they go right into Metal Warriors, which is the shortest song on the album. It's under 4 minutes, and quite frankly, would have been the opening track on virtually every other Manowar album that it was on, just because it's like the perfect opening track.
So going back to the original mixtape, the intro to this mixtape was just vintage Ralph. It starts out with what's known as the 2001 intro that came from a Rush bootleg that Ralph had, and it's just 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you know the Ric Flair's entrance music, I'm sure that was part of the reasoning that Ralph used that as the intro. So it's like this minute and a half of that, and then goes right into Metal Warriors. It's like you couldn't think of a more epic way to start a mixtape, and I think that was probably Ralph's mindset was, if I'm gonna get this kid into metal, this is like the anthem of being a metal fan, for better or for worse. And I think it was a really good choice. And it was never my favorite song on that mixtape, but I also thought that like it really set the tone for not just what the tape was going to entail, but like what the next 30 years of my life was going to turn into. Yeah. I mean, It's kind of crazy, but, so it's a song I've always liked. It's corny as hell, but so is 87% of Manowar's catalog.
Being generous. It's a perfect intro song. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. It's not terribly fast. It's actually kind of more like mid-paced, if anything else. And I mean, it really is just like a metal anthem in many ways, but they do one particular thing on this track that really is awesome. Forget the classic Manowar riffage, and forget about the fact that the lyrics are just, plain atrocious. I love how they have that first, how do I explain it? I guess we'll say like that first verse, right? And like it's they go into the chorus. It's a chorus that they would repeat throughout the entire song, but before they finish that first chorus, they start the second verse. And I always thought that was a cool touch, where it just like it was an overlap between the chorus and the verse, which is something I had never heard up until that point, and it still sticks out every time I listen to this song.
That's a really cool thing to notice, and like I don't know that like I realized that it happened, but never really thought about it. But you're completely right, and that is very cool. I also think it should be noted that about halfway through the song, you hear Eric Adams do his vintage like screamy vocals that are just unbelievable. Nobody has ever to me sounded like this guy. I think he's one of the absolute gems of metal vocals. I probably should have mentioned too on the first track, there are a lot of instrumental parts like we mentioned, but also like the parts that Eric Adams has to do, there's, soft, quiet singing that he does, and then there's just bombastic, screamy type stuff. Like he's such a talented guy, and he's always just been kind of, I feel like, pigeonholed as this like kind of Manowar meathead type guy. But I mean, he's such a talented vocalist, and even in this song, that's such a kind of paint by numbers, kind of metal anthem, goofy lyrics. Like when he just starts that just beastly, like high pitched vocals, it's nobody does it quite like him. And just it's interesting how like the first half of the song is just him singing normal, and then the second half he's just like
screaming.
Just kicks it into a whole other gear. So it's a cool song. I it's probably not even in my top maybe 10 or 15 or even 20 Manowar songs, but it's one of the most important songs to me as a metal fan, just as far as what it means to the beginning of my fandom.
I'm totally with you there. It goes into this song called Ride the Dragon, which is another one that I'd never really paid as much attention to. It was kind of just on when I would play the album. But a couple of things about this particular track. Number one, how they get their instruments to actually sound like a dragon screeching is kind of phenomenal. It's like really well done. They start with it, they end with it. I think there's a section in the middle where it happens too. It's just a really cool sound effect that they're able to do, and I have no idea how to do it. And I guess the Game of Thrones fan in me really thinks that this should have been part of the show because it fits so perfectly. It's fast, it's heavy, and honestly, it's more enjoyable than I remembered. I remember when we listened to Fighting the World, a lot of it didn't click with me. It was just a little too cheesy. This is cheesy too, but like for some reason, this song and this album clicks a little bit more. The drums and the guitar, I think, are the two biggest standouts, though, and I just think of how awesome it would be to see something like this song live.
This song, I think, particularly shines a light on the fact that this is easily Manowar's best produced album up to this point.
No doubt.
It's arguably their first really good mix, because they were definitely guilty of the 1980s, like, just garbage mix for most of their 80s albums. I would argue almost all of them, other than Kings of Metal, and Kings of Metal is not great either. This is a marks, and it could just be a sign of the time and technology improving into the 90s. But this song never really registered with me as a kid, and I think it's because it followed a 28-minute epic battle song followed by like a song that I knew really well from listening to the mixtape. Oh, but in recent years, it's actually become one of my favorite songs from this album, and
really?
I'm actually going to make it my song of the week.
Nice.
I don't know why this song just never resonated with me for years, but then I just remember one day as an adult, I went back and listened to it, and I was like, holy shit, this song is awesome. Like, just a really good song. Like, it's a little less ridiculous, although not by much, than the previous track. It's the first song co-written by David Schenkel on the album. I just think it's a really cool song that I just kind of got lost in the shuffle over the years. But now that I've gone back, and I think re-listening to the album this week kind of cemented my feelings about it. I don't know if I would call it the best song on the album, but it's the one that I think I am most excited to hear nowadays. So we'll give it a listen, and then we'll continue on.
Very, very interesting choice for a song of the week. I did not think you were going to pick that. I kind of had you pegged for something else.
It also has that like kind of signature Manowar guitar chug where it's just kind of
yes,
like it's you'll hear it again probably in the next song. Like it's just very typical of their sound, but I don't know, man. This is it's so fun to me when a song that I've been aware of for 25 years like kind of comes on later in life, and you're just like, oh wow, that was a much better song than I initially had thought. So yeah, good. That was a cool song. Your thoughts on Spirit Horse of the Cherokee?
This was a song I loved as a kid, and for some reason I always found myself really enjoying this one, even though it's not a song that I think most people talk about. Having gone back to it, I don't know that I love it as much as I used to, but it is remarkable in another sense because this album, this song, much like the album does in other spots in Achilles and Ride the Dragon, it really sets the mood well, and it makes you feel like you are like in the middle of the Great Plains on a horse with a spear in your hand, getting ready to find dinner or something like that. It's really, really nuts. And I like how the chorus is this big, bright sounding chorus, almost uplifting in a way. Very cool concept. Just not as great as I remember it, but again, to be honest, going into it, I thought it was going to be my song of the week. That's how much esteem I used to hold this song in. It's just a touch less, I think, at this point. And by the way, I'd be remiss not to mention that when Eric Adams does his like Cherokee-esque vocals, absolutely phenomenal, hits it out of the park. Just a true gem of a vocal performance.
That part where he screams out Geronimo's name is one of the coolest things I've ever heard. The way the slow kind of drum that is just very like a very Native American kind of sound. This is like a really good example of a mid-tempo Manowar song that really hits. I always, just like you, was always a big fan of this song. It turns out I like Ride the Dragon a little bit more now that I'm an adult, but I still think this is a really cool song, and I think that it's so interesting as we go through this album that we've gone from the Iliad to an 80s metal concert to Game of Thrones, and now we're on the Great Plains, as you say. I mean, this album, at least thematically, has been all over the place thus far, and it's kind of interesting. Like, it doesn't really flow well, but then at the same time, it's like I can't really imagine it any differently. It just feels like a lot of different ideas just kind of thrown all together, and like that's fine. Like, not everything needs to be Streets a rock opera, which this clearly is not. But I think it gets the job done, just being like very, very random, I guess.
Well, it does, and we are all over the map. But then we get to like Burning, and I listen to this track, and I think that of all the tracks on the album, this to me is like the biggest clunker of them all. I am not a fan of this song. I think the riffs are decent, at the start, but the spoken word sections are boring to me. It's just kind of repetitive and boring, although I feel like it's supposed to pick up, but it just never does for some reason. And one might argue the Demon's Whip might be the worst track. For me, this is the worst track on the album. And I'll tell you this. The one thing that is interesting that I never heard before, I actually hear Time of the Oath in different parts of this song. And like, I never noticed that before.
It's definitely the same tempo, like,
yeah.
without a doubt.
Do you like this song better than I do, or is this
No, I do not. I think this is the worst song on the album. Also, it's one of my least favorite Manowar songs. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said self-indulgent. This is a self-indulgent Manowar song because it just, like you said, it never gets off the ground. It's boring. It's long. It's not that long, but it feels long.
Feels long, yeah.
It's just not a good song, and I agree. Like between this and Demon's Whip are probably my two least favorite on the album, but those are my two least favorite. This is my least favorite.
I agree.
I think they could have really gotten away with just leaving this off because it kills the momentum dead.
On a 69-minute album, they didn't need this.
Yeah. I'd argue that they would have been. It's just boring. It's just this mid-tempo. The way that Spirit Horse of the Cherokee was a mid-tempo song, that was an interesting song. It had interesting lyrical content. It sounded cool. This is just, oh my God, this is just like blathering nonsense.
But well placed in the middle of the album because it finishes with at least two, if not, for my money, 2 out of 3 very, very good songs. So I'm with you. But then you get the Power of Thy Sword, which is, again, as a 15 or a 16-year-old, so freaking cool. And the way that he's like, you hear like the sword unsheathed, and he's like, it sounds like he's sharpening the sword. It's really, really freaking cool.
And if you listen to this song on headphones, the first sword comes out of the left.
Yep. The
left channel. The other sword comes out of the right channel. It sounds really freaking cool if you're listening on headphones.
I'm with you. And to me, for like my money, this song is kind of a throwback with better production to some of the older albums, and I love it. And I think it's like some of the catchiest verses on the entire album, a very good chorus, and then everything kind of quiets down, which I don't know that it was necessary, but you know what? It's Manowar, so you know what you're going to get, and then it picks back up again, and it ends really strong. I like this track a lot. Another candidate for Song of the Week, but I'm not going to choose it.
This is... I think this is probably the best song on the album, just pound for pound. It's just everything about it. It just is constantly interesting. I think I would argue that the part where it slows down actually just builds the end of it up even stronger. I think it's just such a cool song. I know Rhapsody did a cover of it that I thought was really cool, but I don't know, man. When I first got this album, this was the song that completely grabbed my attention right away. Already knowing Metal Warriors, I think it was the second, or actually it was the first Manowar song I would use on a mixtape. It might have been the very first mixtape I made. I just thought that this song was so cool and unlike anything I'd ever heard of before. Just a really, really cool song.
As opposed to, say, the Demon's Whip, which is track 7.
Yeah, the Demon's Whip is I think, I listened to it and I liked it better than I remembered it. It's better than I
remember it. It's just not good, but it's better than I remember.
Yeah, it's too long and it's stupid.
Yeah, it starts off really, really slow, and you kind of wonder where that is quiet, slow. Where is it going?
It's going straight to the astral plane where it belongs.
That's what I actually have in my notes. Just cut the track. You just don't need it. Again, kind of cool sound effects. The highlight is that wonky sounding guitar solo, which I have to say, I love the solo. I think it's really, really good, but it doesn't really make up for the rest of the song, which is just, it's okay. It's like better than I remember, but just not necessary.
Well, unlike Burning, at least this song does get going, it just takes
Yes.
it takes like 6 minutes
To get
to
there.
happen. And then it's just this slow, marchy kind of boring kind of song. And then it just explodes. Like 6.5 minutes into the song, it just double bass drums galore. Like it just explodes. I don't think it's enough to save the song. It made me kind of chuckle, actually. We had kind of an inside joke about this song to somebody that wasn't a close friend of ours, but we used to say that his girlfriend would keep him close with the Demon's Whip. Shout out to Vinny and his meatball subs in his back pocket. Mike Cray knows what I'm talking about. But another song that I don't know that I would have removed it from the album, but I would have edited it down to maybe like half the length. But I don't know. It's Manowar. They always have to have some sort of weird, wacky kind of song that just doesn't seem to make any sense to anybody but perhaps the person writing it. But then they finish strong. They
finish strong with, again, another track that has nothing to do thematically or really has anything to do with anything with the rest of the album, but it's Master of the Wind. And I'll tell you something, cheesy as they may be, this band knows how to write some good ballads, and this might be the best of the bunch. Kind of thinking back, I love this song. Have a lot of thoughts which I'll share, but let's give it a listen because it will be my song of the week.
Close your eyes, look into the dream. Winds of change will winds of fortune bring. Fly away to a rainbow in the sky. Hope is at the end for each of us to find. Then the road begins where another one will end. Hear the four winds blow. Who will break and who will bend? All to be the master of the wind. Fly away.
Manowar has, ended other albums with songs like Black Wind, Fire, and Steel, which is this like really fast, thrashy song. And here they go the exact opposite approach with a ballad. And I love how it's this slow, epic build. I think the vocal lines are beautiful and the orchestration fits the song perfectly. Nothing is as bad as it seems. And I just think that's such a beautiful line. Shout out to others. But like this, there's something about this song and the way it ends is just so good. And it like puts a smile on my face to end the album. And the reason I made it my song of the week, honestly, is because after the first listen, it has been stuck in my head all week and I can't stop singing it. It's like to myself.
Yeah, it's a really, really awesome song. It's the way that it builds and the use of the drums and everything. Like it's just it's just beautiful. It's just a really great song. I pulled up the that first mixtape that I made after following Ralph's mixtape, and Power of Thy Sword and Master of the Wind are on this mixtape. I mean, you could tell how few albums I owned based on this because there are like about 5 of them making up the entire mixtape, and then a handful. I think I had a handful of Ralph might have left his like CD book at my house or whatever, so that's why you see Conception on here, which is an album I didn't own until I was in college. But this was I talk about how I was always gravitating towards power ballads when I was younger. The last 4 songs on this mixtape 3 of them were power ballads.
Wow.
It was Master of the Wind, Take Away My Pain by Dream Theater, and Believe by Sabotage. So
basically wanting to cry at the end of this.
Yeah, I think I was something of a sap when I was a teenager.
Either way, I'm very happy that you picked this album. It was definitely a trip down memory lane, to say the least, and it brought back a lot of nostalgia. And it held up better than Fighting the World, I'll be honest. Like, it definitely held up better than Fighting the World. If you want our thoughts on that, go way, way deep into the archives for some of our initial thoughts on that album. On a scale of 1 to 10, what are you giving this?
Oh man, this is one I feel like one of the
with this.
Yeah, one of the harder ones to rank. I think I would probably give it an 8. I think that the strong songs, which are really pretty much the whole album to me, other than Burning and Demon's Whip, the rest of the album is excellent. Like, really, really top of the line. Just really good Manowar style metal. I love the 30-minute epic. Metal Warriors is an anthemic classic for me and has nostalgic value. Like I said, Ride the Dragon was just a late in life surprise. Spirit Horse of the Cherokee is just a really good song, and Power Thy Sword and Master of the Wind, as proven by being placed on the mixtape many years ago. It's just it's dragged down by a couple of dud songs, unfortunately, but otherwise it's a very good album. And I still think that Kings of Metal is their best, but this might be their second best as far as I'm concerned.
In terms of completeness, you might be right. It's a 7.5 for me. I thought it was a really good listen. It was higher than I thought I was going to give it. And it certainly has that nostalgia factor as well. But top to bottom, it's one of their better, if not maybe their second or third best disc. So good choice, good choice. I want to talk about next week's request, but before we get there, at least in some detail, some tour news, because there's a number of tours that were announced this week that were interesting. Guns N' Roses going back and doing another world tour, starting in Tel Aviv, Israel on June 5th. They get over to North America in August, and they're basically doing a run of shows through October. So they will be hitting a lot of big markets, obviously stadiums and, baseball fields and all sorts of things. They're playing in like MetLife Stadium in August, where I was fortunate enough to see them a bunch of years ago. I don't think I'll be going to this tour, but good for them. I always enjoy listening to Guns N' Roses, and honestly, a band that we must cover in the not so distant future, because I feel like we could do a lot worse than doing that.
That is a band that I think might be worth doing a career retrospective on, considering that they have about 4 listenable albums. So
you're going to make me listen to Chinese Democracy?
I mean, I think the one time I listened to it, I didn't think it was that bad, but I'm not super familiar with the Lies
Spaghetti Incident.
Which I think Spaghetti Incident was kind of a compilation, right?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't really like a full blown album. But I don't really know Lies that well either. But I just feel like maybe that we just suck it up and talk about the entire. There's a nice 20-year break in between albums. So,
maybe we do it in 2 parts. Maybe we do like the classic years and then the other stuff, or something
trash.
Like that. Yeah, something like that. Another tour that was announced, Moonspell, coming back for another North American run. This one kicks off in Brooklyn. Ironically, in about 2 months, April 29th, they're kicking off their tour, doing a run of shows for about a month. What's interesting is they're bringing some bands with them that I wouldn't have guessed, and namely Elaine, who I just saw on 70,000 Tons of Metal. So that was kind of cool. I think they're really gaining some traction, and deservedly so. And then depending on what side of the country you're on, either Oceans of Slumber or in the West Coast, a band called Winter Sea, which is actually really interesting stuff. I kind of wish they were playing the New York show, just because I've seen Oceans of Slumber a bunch, but interesting tour to say the least. And then finally, some album news, if you will. One of the bands that we covered in the archives, Merciful Fate, is in the studio and has 3 songs, quote, worked out for their next album. So it'll be interesting to see what that sounds like after decades of not doing anything together. Obviously they did the tour, but they haven't released any new music in quite some time.
Did you mention the Emperor tour? when we spoke last week, or?
Yes, I think I did mention that last week. I'll mention it again. Emperor doing a handful of North American dates. I secured my tickets for the New York show. I will not be missing them for sure. They are a really, really good live act.
Cool. Yeah, I couldn't remember, even though we recorded the episode 2 days ago.
all good. And then next week it's the first Monday of the month, which is Request Monday. But we're gonna tease it a little bit. I'll say this: it is a power metal album. It is a classic album. It is by request. We'll see if you can figure it out. We'll put something on our Facebook social media stuff to see if people can kind of guess what album it is. But obviously, it's something we haven't done before. But I have a feeling that a lot of people will be interested in hearing us cover.
Maybe we could do a Clue style reveal where someone would be like, "Did it come out in the 90s? Maybe."
I like it.
Was it a band you guys covered already? Maybe. Like, we could do
a little teaser.
Kind of a, then maybe by the time, the weekend rolls around, somebody will crack the code. But
Action Star.
I will say, yeah, we're gonna do Arwen's. No, I will say I think I can speak for both of us that we're both looking forward to talking about it.
Yes, it's definitely going to be a fun one. So,
and we'll also give our thoughts on the Powerwolf show as well.
Yep, I was just about to say. I'm going to sign off early on this one. We have a lot to do between now and Powerwolf. So enjoy the ride down. I look forward to catching up with you for a couple of days, and then we'll come back with an album that we're going to do next week by request. So enjoy the week, bud. I will talk to you in just a little bit.
Yep, sounds good, buddy. Take care.